Things were going great for Springfield in 1988 when the New York Times had this headline, Crown Jewel for the city's downtown, the $111 million mixed-use Monarch Place. And almost symbolically, there were these two peregrine falcons, which were in danger of extinction at that time, sort of like the city of Springfield, which had nested on one of the upper floors. And the local cable company had actually run a camera, and people could watch 24 hours a day the peregrine falcons. I know because I worked security in the building and I had a key. And when the birds moved off camera, I would have to go up and check on them because people would call until I did. 4 short years later, the building would be $235 million in debt. It would be owned by a consortium of banks. One of the marquee tenants of the building, the Bank of New England, had $6.2 billion in bad real estate loans. And the building, the following year, would be sold to Peter Pan Bus Lines, which is also headquartered in Springfield, for just $24 million, less than a quarter of what it cost to build it. What went wrong? Well, there's a dearth of literature on that, as we shall see. Springfield is probably better known for its colonial, American Revolution, and Industrial Revolution history than it is for the 20th century. Frank Bauer Jr. wrote At the Crossroads, Springfield, Massachusetts, 1636 to 1975. Donald D'Amato wrote Springfield, 350 Years of Pictorial History. And Michael Frisch wrote Town into Springfield, into City, Springfield, Massachusetts, and the Meaning of Community, 1840 to 1880. Guy McLean wrote Pioneer Valley, a Pictorial History. And Michael Koenig and Martin Kaufman wrote Springfield, 1636 to 1986. And they all featured this theme of a glorious past, of almost that frontier experience, and then a really difficult undoing, and then a refinding of the frontier, a la the Turner, the Jackson Turner premise, except that new frontier was going to be urban centers. And they typically ended with this epilogue about the glorious future for the city that urban renewal would provide for it. Although reformers like Jane Jacob would probably raise some objections. The 20th century was not kind to Springfield. Its industries and its facilities quickly became obsolete even before the Great Depression. And it was complacent in addressing those issues, waiting until those problems were generally beyond easy solutions. So they had to turn to the only game in town, wide-scale, major urban renewal projects funded by the federal government. And when those did not work, they pursued even more large-scale projects featuring public or private, didn't matter. The check cleared, you could build your project in the city of Springfield. And they were really seeking to recast Springfield from a blue-collar, working-class, high-wage, low-skill economy that allowed the working man to buy a home, which is why it became known as the City of Homes, to a white-collar, urban professional business hub, regardless of if there were enough corporations in need of that much office space or if they had the workers who had those skills. And so Michael Koenig, who I had the pleasure of being his graduate assistant, wrote several works, A Study in Leadership, Springfield and its Mayors, from 1945 to present, and Shaping an Urban Image with James O'Connell, A History of Downtown Planning in Springfield. And what a glorious time the 80s were. Downtown was littered with office towers, some complete, some under construction. Numerous books were being written, many by Koenig, and almost all of them seeming with a foreword by Springfield Mayor Richie Neal, current congressman, longtime senior congressman on the Ways and Means Committee. And in reading the literature, one may assume that Springfield went on to live happily and prosperously ever after. But that's not what happened. That is not what happened. And so shortly after all the ribbon cuttings and the fanfare, the real estate bubble that many of those projects helped to inflate popped. And Springfield, like much of the New England region, entered the recession of the early 90s earlier, experienced it more deeply, and we're stuck in it longer than most of the rest of the country. But there's a gap of literature on that. No one writes about that. No one has written about that. Little, if any, consideration has been given to why these efforts failed to inoculate the city to that danger. Were these projects poorly conceived, poorly administered? Was it corruption? Was it crime? What can it tell us about other mid-sized cities? Why were these questions never asked? Is it because the city was so dependent on large-scale infusions of federal cash that to ask those questions would make it dangerous? Is it because there wasn't any research being funded at that time because all the sources had dried up? Is it because politicians had a real interest in staying in office through providing this pork barrel legislative generosity for major projects? So those are the questions that I'd like to ask. Some more recent works. Dr. Timothy Black wrote When a Heart Turns Rock Solid about several Puerto Rican youths in Springfield in more recent years. I actually case managed one of the subjects in the book, sent them to school. Robert Ferrant wrote an amazing work on deindustrialization about the American Bosch plant because he worked there. I actually took my wife there to get her eyes checked because it's now a medical building across the street from a women's prison. And we also have a casino. So the historiography of Springfield is really stuck on the past, and with a brief mention of a glorious future, and then fast forward to 2000 when everything's going terribly wrong. And so I really want to take a look at that, look at the other regional histories of similar cities, where they've been successful, where they've failed, and really look at the historiography around that and the different ways of looking at it. Like Tim Black was more in ethnography. And so different ways of looking at, really looking forward to working on this project.